We have to hold or our people starve. The order given by Colonel Saraxalan was swift. The order was loud, but the snout of the presiding officer was stiff with terror. His entire body felt like leather. The fall of the water supply to his base had left them all on short rations. Like most living things, water was vital to survival for the Intakana, and its lack was crippling. Mercifully, the water supply to cities had not been cut off, but the military sources were just gone. Mobile bases. Whoever heard of something so insane? He wondered about that, but the answer was clear. Humans. Humans heard of them. The human transports were much larger than the Intakana confederations were, and at first most believed this to mean that the human armies were much larger than the norm, however. It turned out that the humans brought more equipment than anyone else did, and that equipment included modular military bases, small outpost models of dense metal that fit together like puzzle pieces and could hold 100 soldiers as well as AI turrets. Overwhelming them should have been easy, but their guns created a wide spread of enfilading fire that let these small bases control a large area. Combined with bombardment from the Terran armada above, overwhelming the little bases was impossible. And worse, he was now surrounded. We have to hold on. If we can just hold on until the fleet arrives. If we can just hold on, the colonel repeated in his head as he watched the Terran ground forces begin their advance. Xenomorphs. He cursed them to the gods as they crested the hill, genetically modified monsters that raced on all fours over the ground, tearing out chunks and casting them aside as if they were at war with the world beneath their claws and not the living soldiers toward which they advanced. Xenomorphs were armored living weapons with AI-prompted implants that helped focus their instincts on the genetic signatures of those who they were set against. They had no sense of mercy to speak of and came in a few varieties of horror. Some used acid to melt bodies at medium range, others spat fire by igniting gas through their mouths, making them into living flamethrowers, while others used a poison cloud that took several hours to dissipate. The worst, however, were those who used a sticky webbing. The other forms of death were painful, yes, but they were swift. But if the Terran controllers didn't come on fast enough to rescue those thus trapped, the web users would use fangs to pierce the captive and drain their fluids while still alive in a death that would take more than an hour. The xenomorphs seemed to feel no pain, and so were hard to put down before they approached at close range to use their long, curved claw limbs and long double rows of serrated teeth. The very armor meant to help the Intakana infantry survive only dragged out the agony of their deaths. Heavy armor could crush them. Close explosions would destroy their organs. They could die, but they were legion. Then there were the genetically modified humans. A long-range round exploded a captain's head right beside Saraxa. The pink innards spattered as the body dropped. "Sniper!" he cursed. It was an ugly reality of fighting humans. "I believed we were apex predators, but this is another level," he cried out in his head as he dropped to the ground and scurried back into the building to take remote control of their position's defenses. His was the linchpin of the defense of their food supplies. As long as he held out, the cities would refuse to submit. The human depth perception was unusually good, and they created complicated weapons that took advantage of their natural desire to deal death at a distance, which was bad enough. But when he looked at the screen, he could see the drone cam identified a human frontline infantryman. Reactive armor plating protected his chest, and a helmet fully covered his head, giving the already alien being an even more terrifying appearance. His handheld semi-automatic weapon was tipped with a long, ugly blade for close combat. And that was the horrifying thing. Human soldiers didn't mind closing the gap. The soldier disappeared as he jumped into an Intakana trench. "Target that position! Take him down!" Saraxa shouted into the microphone. Even one human inside their positions was a disaster. Screams and wails were followed by a splash of blood that went up over the top of the little defensive position, and a half a dozen Intakana began scrambling out to flee. The drone caught sight of it, and Saraxa cursed again. Incoming rockets fell on the position, possibly taking out the human, possibly not. The red dust and clods of plants obscured his view. But what he did see was the next horror. Kana infantry were cresting the hill, alongside Idiaxa and sacred dark soldiers, each clad in armor tailored to them and bearing Terran-made modified weaponry. The sound of rockets coming in and being shot down by his little base's automated defenses spoke of the inevitable end. Soraxa could feel it. Holding on against hope, he kept shouting orders into his automatic audio router to try something, anything, to stem the tide as the walls were overcome and the xenomorphs began attacking isolated buildings, locking down position after position until the human infantry and their alien lackeys fell in to begin to finish the brutal work. At least most of us won't be eaten, Soraxa thought as he watched them close in on his position and herald the end of his people as masters of their fates. When he awoke, weeks later, it was to the sight of a white and red-clad human standing over him, speaking into a translator telling him, "Welcome back. It looks like you're going to survive after all. I win my bet." It was the first relief the colonel had felt in months. President John Brown looked at the screen. The ascended co-representative was wreathed in darkness, as was their usual way. Thus far, no technology had been able to properly pierce the darkness to see them up close. Their religion, what he knew of it, held that they were born of black holes, and the closest they came to restoring themselves to their rightful place in the order of the universe was to wreathe themselves in an all-consuming darkness that even light could not illuminate. Humanity will pull back. The transmission was garbled, sounding much like a radio wave recording of nuclear tests. "Humanity will not pull back," John declared and leaned forward over his desk toward the transmitted black space. "Humanity will pull back, or the ascended co will kill you by the billions." The blackness declared, "We will bless your lives with death and teach you to humble yourselves before the birthers of the galaxy." "We refuse," President Brown said, his eyes staring deep into the dark, willing it to part to reveal the source of the voice. "They have taken our people's freedom. They aided in taking our lives. We will not give in, not to them, not to their allies, and not to you." "You will regret your choice," the black said. "Not as much as you will. It doesn't matter how strong you are, we are set upon a path we will not turn back from. We will never give in. Not until every slave is free. Not until every enemy of mankind has been broken on the shores of our will. We will fight to the bitter end, and it does not matter if you are stronger, the bigger you are, the harder you will fall." John's slender jaw was set like stone in his unwavering defiance, and the co-representative, wherever it was within the black, seemed to hesitate. "You will lose billions," he warned. "They will die free, and to set free millions in the process. That's a worthy cause to die for, far better than most could ever be. Do what you want, and see if you can live with the consequences as well as we can," John retorted. "No one has ever stood against a co-armada and won," the speaker replied. "Yet," John answered, and killed the transmission. Praxa Jean was practically dancing with glee as he watched the screen. The Ascended Co were bombarding a Terran world, and casualty estimates were coming in from Rorona Jean's department that put human deaths in the hundreds of millions. When Rorona entered the room, he didn't hesitate. "They did it! The Ascended Co have invaded the Terran Empire!" he shouted with delight. But his cousin did not, for reasons not readily clear, share his joy. Rorona approached the table and sat down, his drooping snout swaying a little and his long, thin arms folding together on the table in front of himself. "Didn't you hear me?" Praxa shouted with delight, a lot louder this time as he repeated himself about the invasion. "I know, cousin," Rorona replied. His voice, far from exuberant, was more stressed than ever. "Then why aren't you celebrating? The humans can't possibly win. They're at war with gods. What can they hope to do but die?" Praxa cried out, almost desperately trying to pull joy out of his dour cousin's strained soul. "Computer," Rorona called out to their AI system, "bring up the recent transmissions that have gone up across the Terran Empire." The screen transitioned away from the site of the Ascended Co-Armada and to a public streaming service. "Buy war bonds! Build the ships that will save us all! Every purchase is an investment in our future. And if you have no credits, join the service. Take up the rifle, cannon, and ship, and fight in every breach to keep back the nightmare. Will you stand between your homes and this? The screen transitioned between the Terran Armada and the decimated world that was decimated a week earlier. So? Praxa asked. So they aren't pulling back. Rorona said, they've continued to capture our systems. We've lost 2 more allies since that transmission, and 2 more worlds of our own. The Kana keep growing stronger too. Our entire plan hinged on the idea that against the overwhelming might of the ascended Co, humans would give way. But they're not. I'm sure our cousin sacrificed his life to the Co to get their aid, but it isn't enough. Rorona finally let some emotion into his voice and shouted at the ruler of their empire. Praxa stepped back in shock at Rorona's words. We have no fleet left. Just a handful of frigates and cruisers that are barely enough to handle pirates, let alone an entire Terran armada. The Co no longer matter. They came too late, and the humans aren't drawing back from us. I fear we have to surrender. If we do so now, we can get some good terms. We can gain protection against retribution from the Kana. We can save hundreds of millions of lives. No! Praxa shouted in horror. His entire body froze as if trapped in ice. It was unthinkable. But Rorona wasn't done. They already hold billions of our people effectively hostage, and they've restrained themselves from slaughtering our cities. Strange as it sounds, it seems they've even treated our wounded. I don't know what to make of it. They crush our armies, and then heal the wounded afterward and let our captives go to live lives as civilians. Whatever the reason, I think it means we can get good terms. But if we don't yield, we have nothing left to fight with. Rorona let his hands fall from off the table to hang at his side. Praxa balled his hands into fists. We will fight to the death. I don't care if we have to fight until the very last one of our people is in the grave. We will hold on until the humans surrender to the Co. Then we will reclaim our empire, slaughter the Kana until they are 1/100th of their current numbers, claim the human captives of the gods as slaves to replace the lost lives, and then dominate the rest of our treasonous allies in the same way. Our empire will rule as it was always meant to. No more compromise, and the Terrans will be remembered for their hubris in the face of divinity, Praxajan declared, and waited for his cousin to bow to his will as he always did. Rorona bowed his head. Do you remember when we were young, cousin, and the question of which of us should rule between the 3 of us, and you offered to pit 100 of your supporters against 100 of mine? I do. You gave in to my will instead. Praxa replied, and you have been faithful to me ever since. Yes, but you never asked me why I gave in, so would you do me the honor of asking me why now? Rorona replied. Praxa tilted his head a little. Very well, I don't see the relevance, but why? Because you wanted it more than I, and I wasn't willing to let my mate get hurt by your ambition. You were clever, and I trusted that you would listen to reason. I thought you could rule at least as well as I could have. That is why I convinced our late cousin to join the priesthood and serve the gods, and bowed to your will then, as I always have. Rorona answered, and Praxa preened a little at that. You have been faithful to me, but why do you bring that up now when we are so close to turning defeat into triumph? Praxa asked. Computer, Rorona said. Playback transmission X24601, X42, X3.14, X001, and X69 in multi-screen mode. The videos blinked to life all at once. There was an obviously smuggled spy video showing no fewer than 20 battleships in various stages of production. There were 6 more being built on each of the following images, and then in the last screen, a projected path of the 3 Terran armadas that were closing in on the interior planets of what was left of the Intakana Empire. These, cousin, have changed my mind about everything, and I am sorry, Rorona said in a quiet, reasoned voice. Praxa barely had time to comprehend those words while he watched the videos play before his eyes. When he did, and turned his eyes toward his cousin, he saw that Rorona was no longer seated. He was standing, and he was holding a weapon in his hand. The shot was like thunder, and Praxa didn't feel the pain for several seconds. He tried to move his limp snout to ask why. But already his strength was fleeing him, and his body was falling forward to die on the table from which he'd ruled his empire and run it into the ground. You're probably wondering why, cousin. So as a parting gift, I will tell you, Rorona said as he approached the limp and dying body. As long as you ruled, President Brown would not have accepted any offer of peace. He is a fanatic on par with any of our priests. But if you are dead, I can negotiate an end, a surrender that will spare our people slaughter and suffering. We may lose our empire, but if studying our enemy has shown me anything, it is that defeat is sometimes more prosperous than victory. I will surrender, and I will do as the Kaksak did, offering myself as you never would have, if that will satisfy them. But if nothing else, I will ensure we continue even without you. Praxajan wanted to shout, to rage, to scream, to attack the traitor. But he couldn't move. He couldn't move, and soon he couldn't even feel his wound. His eyes went hollow, and the last thing he saw was Rorona reaching for the chair in which the masters of the empire had sat for centuries. The last thing he felt was the floor, as his body was dumped out of the way to let his cousin take his place. Then there was nothing. Not ever again. Rorona spared a pitying look at his cousin, and then said, "Open a diplomatic channel to the Terran Republic, and connect to the entire empire and military back channels on standby, public and secret nets." The computer obeyed, beeping as the connections began to link 1 by 1 and 10 by 10, leaving Rorona only a moment to think of what to say. It wasn't necessary, though. He knew what he had to do, and that was enough. Roronajan stood in front of the video monitor that would transmit his image and his words out to the whole of his empire, even the worlds that were currently occupied, if the Terran Empire didn't jam the signal. Though whether they'd done that or not, he was unsure. Emperor Praxajan is dead. He has taken his own life as a way to take responsibility for his failure to secure the Intakana Confederation's safety and future. With the death of our cousin, the ascended priesthood has no head, as Praxa did not appoint one before his ending. As such, I, Roronajan, ascend into the place of both of my cousins. I accept full responsibility for the war my cousin provoked, and am offering terms of surrender to the Terran Republic at this very hour. We have fought hard. For all the folly that led us to this place, no one will say that the Intakana were cowards in the final hour. As we fought with courage in war, let us now apply that courage to our future peace. I have never said so many lies in all my life put together as I've spoken in the last hour. Rorona thought with a faint sense of disgust in his gut. The only true thing in the hour-long speech was that the Intakana had fought with courage. I wonder if the humans could bear losing so many ships without making peace. It was an idle curiosity, but one thing he knew for sure was that their current president would tolerate it. His wild, fanatical drive made deception impossible, and it was that, far more than any military defeat, that convinced Rorona that the war's outcome was a foregone conclusion. How do you defeat someone for whom there are no unacceptable losses? He had no idea, but it convinced him of something else. Humans are insanely dangerous. They are a force of nature as implacable as gravity itself. The human slave rebellions had taken far less time to begin than the Kana, and the human slaves had taken brutality on their masters to a level never imagined possible. Worse, they were a third again as strong as Intakana, even without genetic modifications. Even if we won, we would just change the war from being far out in space to being in our own homes and cities as human slaves came within knife reach. In his nightmares, that thought came to pass, and if it had, the outcome was little in doubt. We would be extinct. We would be the first species to go extinct because of victory. Out of all the lies he told to the Intakana, there was one he told with a deeper purpose. He wanted the population anxious, thinking about the end of the war, to make their resistance crumble early. If he'd told them that the Terran president had already accepted the terms he offered, they might have been shocked, or thought it a trick, or started wondering about the conditions under which Praxa had died. Not that investigation would find anything. The body was already modified to reflect a self-inflicted wound, and within a few hours, His final message would confirm the truth. He doubted anyone would be much interested in looking into the matter, not when he made both a convenient scapegoat and a convenient martyr, bearing the blame in their place as well as being redeemed by his sacrifice at the end. The story had all the elements Rorona could have asked for in a cover story. In the distant future, after I'm dead, people will ask questions, look for evidence, offer speculation, and who can say? Maybe they'll even figure out the truth. But with this one death, I have saved us all. He told himself as he relaxed at ease in the ascended estate on the highest mountain of his homeworld. It was then that he really began to reconsider the humans' methods. Because I could expect mercy, I ended the fighting early. I wonder how many lives have been saved because one side did not need to fight to the bitter end. His snout bounced as he snorted, "Masters of war indeed," he thought, and waited for the Terran Armada to arrive and begin the occupation of his homeworld. President John Brown wanted to dance with glee, but buried that desire beneath a somber face as he addressed the Terran Republic. The Intakana Confederation has officially surrendered. They are no more. Our fleets have split into groups to occupy their final worlds, and we will station 500,000 soldiers on each to ensure a peaceful transition into a new order of peace and democracy throughout their sectors. The terms of peace are available on the wider net, but here are the highlights. All Terran slaves are released with compensation for work performed while captives. The Kana are now free, and all Intakana occupiers are to be relocated to their home systems, with all property and resources left behind to compensate the Kana for their captivity. Overseers, slave traders, and owners of slaves on those worlds are to be sentenced to hard labor for 20 years before they are allowed to join the others in departure. However, a single Intakana death at any labor facility will result in the freedom of all other prisoners. The Intakana fleet is to be turned over to the Terran Republic, and the worlds we have captured will remain in our possession with no Intakana or other Confederation member races deported or deprived of property, granting them full rights as citizens of our Republic within 1 year, following a period of re-education to teach them what that means for them. The Kana are prohibited any off-world retaliation, and all slaving companies are to be broken up and set to compensating their former victims and arranging for the reunification of the broken-up families from around what was Confederation space. The remaining unoccupied Intakana will be turned into a protectorate state, pending a plan of broader integration into the Terran Republic. There were other points as well, but they were trivial, and already broadcasts showed the former Terran slaves being moved onto transports bound for the Terran Republic. Rorona either moves with uncommon speed, or he had this in mind before the proposal. It really makes me wonder if he had anything to do with Praxajan's suicide. It was an idle thought in the aftermath of his address, and far too irrelevant for him to spend much time on it. Even with the end of the war in the West, there was another problem. A transmission came in telling him exactly what that problem was too. Planet Xer has fallen to a co-invasion. John felt more of his hair turn white. Before checking the details of the message, he cycled over to the fleet construction report. "Another 3 months," he mumbled, but then went over to the recruitment report for the infantry. On 20 worlds, the numbers were tremendous, and some of those worlds were not too far away from the victorious fleets of the Western space. The order was obvious. Transmit orders to all fleets. Those not engaged in direct occupation are to return to our space, link up with ground forces at designated assembly systems, and chase the invaders off. He then sent a funding request to the Senate to allocate resources from the occupied Confederation worlds to the building of yet more battleships. No sooner than he'd sent that order than another message came in from the Ascended Co. "Submit to us. You have lost the fight." They sent one of those every single time they occupied a world, and they'd captured 9 worlds already. John usually ignored them, but this time he chose to respond. He hit the response icon and shouted, "I have not yet begun to fight," and then he killed the link again.